Well, hello and welcome back to Read Becca for my weekly catch-up on everything that I've read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading for roughly the current week. And I had a very good reading week as a result of Mid-Month Book Bash. I've already posted my blog up from last weekend about that. I read 4 things that were all nonfiction for that blog on the topic of doing nothing. So let's quickly run through what I read there. First up, I read kind of 2 nonfiction books in the same vein. The first was In Praise of Wasting Time by Lightman. This is a tiny book adapted from a TED Talk. And then I also read the book of Ichigo, Ichie, on audiobook. That was also a very, very short book, only about 3 hours in audio, I think. And both of them were really similar feeling in terms of the mix of anecdotes, research, and just general kind of motivational stuff. And so they were a good blend for a short read. This one has almost nothing practical to it. It is just extolling the virtues of not having something in your mind all the time or having a task at hand. And Ichigo Ichie was the opposite. It felt very practical. It had a lot of specific advice about what to do. However, for me, this was actually the better of the two, I think. I think this one was more usable. The book of Ichigo Ichie, for me, it felt practical, but it was all about optimizing to an extreme that I didn't really like. And so I felt like the practical advice was either just common sense stuff that I already know, or it was stuff I would just never use because it was over the top for me. But I did like both of them. Then I read Rental Person Who Does Nothing by Shoji Morimoto. And this is a memoir, kind of. It's more accounts from his experience of having quit his job and started up a Twitter account advertising that he will join someone along on anything they need a second person with them, more or less. So he's not there to provide any specific service. He's not being paid. He simply takes reimbursement for his travel time in order to do this, meeting up with these people in his area roughly. He has traveled a little farther for some things, but it doesn't seem like he's accepted any longer traveling type of endeavors. And the things he does are very, very mundane. So I liked that aspect, and that this is just showing an email he gets with a request and his tweet after the experience, simply recounting it very factually what occurred on the event that he went on. But after that, he's musing much more about his thoughts on doing nothing and the inherent value of people, the toxicity of productivity culture, and the ways that we have inequity in our work culture, both in Japan, and it applied to the US quite a bit to me. So I enjoyed this one, I think, the most out of the books, but I think I got the most takeaway for me personally out of the final one that I read, and that was Praying with Jane Eyre by Vanessa Zoltan. And this is Reflections on Reading as a Sacred Practice. So this is essays, but also part memoir in at least the first half. And the essays are on different topics within her processing of a deep reading of Jane Eyre that she's done over years and years and years. She kind of left her career at 30 and went back to school to the Harvard Divinity School and became a chaplain. But she's an atheist and kind of didn't want to seek out the same thing she had seen in a religious practice through a god specifically, any individual god, but was seeking out the sacred in things that were a little bit more tangible to her. So she was looking at devotion and sacredness in reading a fictional novel. And I enjoyed that very, very much. I think the memoir portions were much weaker for me in drawing the conclusions that she wanted to, but they tell us a lot about where she came from and why she thinks and feels the things she does. So I do think they were valuable to building the structure of this book. However, I enjoyed the back half of this book so much, because as we're getting into the essays and she's talking through what she finds in these stories that she is deep reading, and why she is able to gain the same kind of value out of deep reading a novel that she would out of a religious text. And so I enjoyed this for that very, very much. And this is my own copy. I already returned the library copy and got my own. So I'm very, very happy with that read. So that was all that I read for Mid-Month Book Bash. If you want more, it's in the blog that's already out there. Other than that, I did read more this week since last weekend. So the first one I guess I will talk about is a novelette that I read as an ebook, and that is Wild Diplomacy by D.G. Red. This was kind of a random pickup that I had seen from a listing of new releases in sci-fi and fantasy a while ago, and it sparked my interest because it's about a gnoll who is a diplomat, or trying to be a diplomat, to humans. the gnolls have set up kind of trade and diplomacy with other humanoid species like orcs and goblins, but haven't quite been able to reach humans. And it's so interesting because this is a novelette, it's very short, and the whole thing is a fish out of water story. So we have Forrest, who is the gnoll, and she is going to this group of humans, seeking out to set up trade and diplomacy, as I said. She doesn't really understand, or there is definitely a language barrier there as well. She doesn't totally know how to interact with humans, and that sets off a lot of interesting things. So there's the language barrier and the trying to figure out human culture, along with the barrier of humans very much simply perceiving that gnolls cannot be intelligent or sentient in any way. So they view her as sort of a dog, and also, because of the language barrier, can't really understand her entirely. So I think that's where I would leave the plot, but I like this so much more than I expected even. It's 60-ish pages, and so there wasn't a ton of room to get a lot of world building, but I do feel like it was there, and I definitely attached to the character. And for me, I'm just a huge fan of like anthropological sci-fi and fantasy, and this had very strong vibes of that because of the way that it's presented. So I was left at the end of this feeling like it just kind of stopped, and I wanted a lot more story. I wanted to continue on this diplomatic journey for Forrest. And unfortunately for me, I think there are multiple other books, actual novel-length stories in this world that are not sequential necessarily. They seem to be all standalone companion novels. So I have picked those up, but they don't, because they're not sequels, they don't seem to follow Forrest and her diplomatic journey. But they all do seem very unique and different from sort of standard fantasy to me. So I will be looking forward to checking those out some more. Then I got to the big one, Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I have read this before, so this was a reread, and I very, very much enjoyed it. This was kind of perfect because it is a really big book. It's 450 pages. It's not a mammoth, but this is perfect for Big Book Summer. That's one of the reasons why I picked it up. And it was great. I had forgotten a lot of the minutiae. I remembered all the big details, and I'm happy with that. I actually remembered them better than I had expected. But this is a very dark story. Very dark, very graphic violence in here. A lot of really big triggers, definitely. If you have any, you want to look them up. And I would say this is probably closest to flat-out urban fantasy. It has all of the tropes of urban fantasy for me, where we're in this very, very gritty, well-realized setting that is almost a character of its own. We have the noirish elements where there is a mystery at the core of this. Something suspicious has happened and needs to be investigated. And throughout this, there is the paranormal. So what is that? The whole premise here is that we are at Yale, and this version of Yale has secret societies that are in fact meddling in the paranormal. But not just meddling in the paranormal, this is elites behaving badly. They're tinkering with the paranormal and ghostly baddies in order to enrich and further their greed and wealth and status entirely. So it's very much the wealthy acting poorly and taking advantage of everything else and not really caring about what they're doing. So that includes a lot of really gruesome stuff. So we are following a character, Alex Stern, Galaxy, as she has been recruited. She's kind of the street rat that has a special ability that we know from the very beginning. She can see the dead, she can see ghosts, and she doesn't need a potion or elixir to do this, and that's very special and unique. So she's been recruited and gained something that she's always wanted. She's been out as a loner just trying to survive, and now she's got stability. She's got meals she can count on in the cafeteria, and she finds that so wonderful and amazing. So she is that kind of special girl character a little bit, but I think she's a well-realized character in that aspect. And she seems very, very well depicted and realistic as far as the struggles that she's been through to me. But she's taken under the wing of Daniel Arlington, or Darlington, who is currently filling a very specific role that she's apprenticing to take over, more or less, known as the Dante. And they are working for Lethe House. In these secret societies, there are 8 houses, and those 8 houses are doing all of this ridiculous magic to enrich themselves, as I said, and each house has a different kind of magic. But the 9th house of the title, the Lethe House, are known as the Shepherds, but realistically they're really bodyguards or bouncers a bit for these magical rites that all these other houses are performing to protect them and shepherd them through the situations that they might get themselves into. So they're keeping things in line. a bit. And that very much is what her job is, to be there seeing the supernatural forces that are going on as these magical rites happen. And because something suspicious has occurred and there's a mystery, she becomes very much involved in investigating that on her own. And to the tropes I was talking about earlier with urban fantasy, there's obviously a police character that comes up over and over again that isn't directly involved, but is kind of involved and in the know, that sort of thing. So very, very tropeful noir stuff. So I enjoyed all of that. I thought it was so well executed and feels really gritty, but also very propulsive. So this is almost like a grim, dark version of urban fantasy, if such a thing exists. I love the way that this is told, because we are jumping through time for basically her first college year in this book. And because we're jumping back and forth, we're getting all right from the beginning. We know that at the start, she's this young, not quite fresh-eyed because she is such a street urchin, but she's coming in unknowing. She's learning the lay of the land, very much. And then we kind of get the middle part of the story we're jumping to, or in the timeline, is this sort of mystery that she's uncovering and unraveling. It's something she can't let go of pulling on the thread of. And as she pulls, it just keeps unraveling more, really. And then the latter timeline that we're getting into, something has clearly gone horribly, horribly wrong. And how we get from those first two parts to the horribly, horribly wrong part is the filling in of everything. And so it's really compelling to read and get you there. What I had remembered about this from, like, the ending is a little bit open-ended, or it's giving us a way forward to a continued story, definitely. But I had forgotten just how much satisfying ending we get. So if you have heard that this sort of ends on a cliffhanger a little bit, I would say you do actually really get a satisfying conclusion to the mystery of this story for me. So I feel like it's pretty self-contained, but I am very happy because I have Hellbent sitting on my shelf to dive into perfectly. That was why I set this up, and I'm so looking forward to seeing how we continue and what that open ending that we leave on goes into in this next book, because man, was this so fantastic. Like, everything about this just sucked me in this week, even though I was having really massive problems with both time and focus this week. What else to say about this? I think other than that, I would say most people build this as dark academia. I completely and heartily disagree with that. I disagreed before, but I disagree even more after rereading it. If you're going in for purely vibes, I might say yes, it has a certain vibe of dark academia. Like, it's the wealthy behaving badly, and they are technically at a school. But realistically, there are maybe 10 pages total that even reference academics in any way in this book. They're not actively, like, on campus. They're not going to classes. We're not hearing about them doing homework very often, anything like that. They are the right age. They're doing things that college students would do in terms of social life and their behavior generally, and faculty. And so that framing is there, but there is no academia whatsoever, really. There's no sense of academics behaving badly to get ahead at academics that I think is a fairly requiring factor for dark academia. So to me, it's not really there. But if you're just going for vibe, I would say probably there's a little bit of dark academia there. So we will see if that becomes a bigger thing as it goes along in this series. And I'm now curious, because I hadn't realized before when I read it that this is quite contained to her first year. So it would make the most sense if this is a 4-book series to follow her college years, but I don't know. I don't know if there's 3 or 4 books planned. So I think that's it for books finished anyway. And I think really I enjoyed all of the books that I read this week, at least middle of the road or higher. The only thing that I have in progress right now is Mossflower, but I'm not really progressing on this. I was mainly focused on finishing up Ninth House, and I've been reading some general short fiction, nothing of note, and my TLS's, or Times Literary Supplement, is a weekly magazine on literary criticism that I get from the UK, and I've been so backlogged this year with it that I'm just trying to catch up a lot on it. And it comes in waves. It doesn't get delivered routinely, and it's very out of order very often. So I was feeling backlogged, and then I got a whole bunch of them delivered all at once to catch up on as well. So I'm trying to read through this, and there's not been really anything of note there to talk about. So I think that's it. I wanted to make this a fairly quick one, and hopefully hopefully this will be quickish. So what else to talk about? I don't have anything that I finished watching. Life-wise, Gumbo had a vet appointment, and that was both good and bad. She's very healthy. It was traumatic for her. I know. Going to the vet is the worst, huh? Yeah. Poor girl. Oh, so sad. She does freeze at the vet, so I got to enjoy holding her. That's the only time I ever get to hold her. We discovered that last year, that she would allow me to hold her while we're there because she's just so frozen. But she did very, very well and didn't have a raced heart rate for once, so that was an improvement. And she did let me hold her the entire time. So that was my probably brightest spot of the week. Otherwise, it's been an incredibly terrible week. It's the work outside my house has been even worse than in the vlog. I showed some of that in the vlog of the holes in my yard. That got worse. It turned into a trench all the way through my yard. And then they closed that up and I was like, oh my goodness, they may be getting done. No, as it turned out, that was the internet line that they were running. They are now working on, or they have been working all along on stuff for the electrical. And today, this morning, I got up looking forward to a nice Saturday, and guess what? At like 8:30, they started working out there again, and they ran a large pipe all the way across my yard on top of the ground. And it seems like they're measuring and preparing things to run it under the ground. So I'm guessing there's going to be another trench through my yard again. So yeah, so that was just frustrating. Just very frustrating. This has been going on for now like 2 months, maybe more, since they were doing road work outside for about a month. And now it's been weeks and weeks that they've been trying to repair all of the damage that was done from that to the utility lines. So I'm very frustrated. That was not what I really wanted out of my day today. I wanted a nice, quiet, relaxing reading morning, and immediately they were out there doing work and loud noises all day long. So they've just finally stopped, and it's like 4:30. So yes, that continues. And otherwise, I'm sure everyone in the world probably knows there was a massive worldwide technology issue at the end of this week, and that did in fact affect me. So it's been a very hectic past couple of days, though quite thankfully, like I have to say, it was not anything super severe. I was both very lucky and there's a lot of immense preparation that succeeded at making us not be horribly affected. But it was awful. It was just hours and hours and hours of sitting on calls, trying to make sure everything was okay. And recover things that were not okay, but fortunately weren't a huge deal. So that was my week, and I think that is all I have to talk about this week. Recommendations, the only one I can remember, I'm not going to go bother to look them up. I will do that next week, but the only recommendation off the top of my head is Sean Breath's books, formerly Sean the Book Maniac, did a wonderful, I think, the Zooming In chat topically with Bob the Booker on the pressure to keep up as a reader once you're in these sort of bookish spaces or as a bookish creator. And I love that both of them are not the people who are really overly pressured by numbers of books. So it was not that discussion. It wasn't the treadmill of trying to keep up with book counts or Goodreads goals, those kinds of things, or even the numbers that other people are reading, so much as it was more a discussion of the topic, like seeing all these exciting books coming out, the new releases lists, seeing book prizes, and constantly having this list in your mind that you want to get to, and never having that fresh discovery or moment of not knowing what you're going to read next, because there's just always such a long list in your mind that you want to get to. And I loved the way that they talked through that topic. So very good. Definitely check that one out. So I think that is it for myself and Ripley. I hope you are having a really wonderful reading week as always, and thanks you so much for joining me today.